Hi folks, as you can see, the avocado tree under which I do most of my videos was shorn, and had to be shorn because the branches were, it's actually in a neighboring plot. Um, I love the fact that the branches were coming over this particular apartment complex, but they were growing rather rapidly, and so they were shorn. I do still get to have some shade, and my face is better lit without a doubt. And I'm squinting a little because it's actually brighter, because it was really nice behind the camera to have some foliage, but it is what it is, and you can still see part of the tree, and poor tree. Anyway, you might question why it is that I'm doing a video talking about the different planets that we look at in a chart 2 days before an eclipse, when I should probably be contributing to the eclipse madness and the eclipse drama. And some of the eclipse madness and drama is there for a reason. The astrology of July is, to be fair, pretty intense, and I will focus on that as we move forward. I've already done some videos on that. If you are at any of my last few videos, but I've already done the new moon solar eclipse video for July the 2nd, and you'll find it if you just scroll down my list of videos a couple of weeks ago. So that's already done. Typically I do it after the new moon, but it was done a couple of weeks ago because there was already planetary activity in Cancer. But there's a reason why I want to talk about planets. And the reason is to talk about the planet Mercury. And on the one hand, we know that Mercury is going retrograde on July the 7th, already something that has been addressed in the middle of all the July craziness. But Mercury also has its own cycle. And I've never talked about a Mercury cycle on these videos before, and I'm kind of excited to introduce this concept to you folks. People who are astrology aficionados and follow Mercury and Venus cycles are going to be familiar with those. But there's something important about these cycles that we're going through, and I'm realizing that in some ways my own videos are not entirely complete without bringing up the discussion of a Mercury cycle. But before I talk about a Mercury cycle over the next coming week, I first need to talk about how the planets are set up, at least in the way that I experience them in my own chart and people's charts. Some of the bodies I'm going to talk about are not strictly planets in an astronomical sense. The moon is not a planet. The moon is a satellite of the Earth. Chiron is not a planet. It appears to be an asteroid, although is it a minor planet? Is Pluto a planet? The bottom line is, we as astrologers, it's pretty standard for a Western astrologer to be looking at the very minimum, the Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Chiron, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, along with the North Node and the South Node, which I'm not going to be discussing for now, today. And some astrologers will start to factor in some other asteroids or planetary bodies. As we've discussed before, a lot of the planetary setup is pretty patriarchal, because out of all these bodies mentioned, there's really only two, the Moon and Venus, who are feminine in nature. The rest are all masculine, with Mercury being an open question, insofar as it's often portrayed as someone who is young enough to not really have a pronounced gender, or sometimes Mercury is portrayed or thought of as a more hermaphroditic, or truly less identifying with a particular gender. But irrespective of how we place Mercury, the rest of the setup is pretty male. And when we look at the Moon and Venus, it's fascinating. When we look at texts, there's a lot of projecting onto the Moon and Venus. I think we have a better handle on the Moon, but Venus is really still a very misunderstood planet. And there's an increasing lens, I think, and an important lens to start to try and understand the divine feminine archetype in the same way that the divine masculine archetype is extolled. The other thing is that when it comes to the asteroids, strangely enough, there are a lot of female asteroids that are taken into consideration. Pallas and Aphrodite and Hebe and Juno and Lilith, and so it's kind of interesting. They're not given the same prominence as planets, and yet they're out there, and certain Western astrologers give them their share of importance. Let's move to the heart of the meat of this video. Today I'm going to talk about, briefly, the Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Chiron, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. And here's what I'm going to say. For me, the sun stands on its own. The moon and Mercury, Venus and Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Chiron, Uranus, Neptune and Pluto are their own interesting pairs. From where we sit on planet Earth, the sun, Mercury, and Venus move around us and complete a cycle within roughly the same time. If you look at the way the solar system is set up, it's interesting because the sun and Mercury and Venus are closer to the sun than the Earth is. And Mercury and Venus are never really that far from the sun. Indeed, whatever your sun sign is, Mercury is either going to be in that sun sign or one sign before and one sign later. Venus is going to be either in your sun sign or up to 2 signs before and 2 signs later. From where we sit on planet Earth, Mercury and Venus never go too far away from the sun. So you can actually look at each sun sign and start to categorize people of sun signs and really start to understand different types. So I have my sun in Sagittarius. Am I a Mercury in Scorpio Sagittarius? Am I a Mercury in Sagittarius Sagittarius? Am I a Mercury in Capricorn Sagittarius? Fascinating, especially for astrology aficionados. Am I a Sun in Sagittarius, a Venus in Libra, Venus in Scorpio, Venus in Sagittarius, Venus in Capricorn, or Venus in Aquarius? And it becomes really interesting then to start to look at each sun sign and start to understand where the Mercuries and Venuses are. And people with a certain sun sign can start to fit into interesting categories as a result of where their Mercury especially is, but also where their Venus is. The sun, wherever the sun is and wherever the sun is transiting, I am clear and convinced at this point in time that the sun really stands for your soul. It stands for a part of you that is not immediately accessible, but it is there and it is all-knowing and it is driven on its own divine. It is fundamentally connected to what I will call the divine. You can call it consciousness, you can call it presence, you can call it the universe, whatever you want. It has its own timeline, it has its own knowledge, it has its own cycle, it has its own understanding of where things are at. It has its own path, it has its own clarity with regard to what it is you're here to do and how to go about it. Wherever the sun is in whatever part of your chart is not only what is spotlit, because it is a giant spotlight for your life, it is also, as one astrologer with whom I consulted a while ago, but he used this phrase, and I think he's absolutely right, it is the part of the chart where you naturally shine. Wherever the sun is transiting, subconsciously, and I'm using that word subconsciously, undeniably, the sun exerts its spotlight in that part of the chart. And from a soul level, from a your truth level, from a your fundamental, the part of you that you're trying to access when you meditate and when you try and still your mind and when you try and create a distance from your feelings, when you try to factor out Mercury, mind, and the moon, feelings and emotional identification by doing things like meditation, what you're really trying to do is access your sun, is access your soul, is access that part of you that is connected, all-knowing, and clear. I'm not going to use the word intuition, I'm just going to use the word numinous. I'm going to use the word, really just I'm going to say clear, on purpose, on target. And the sun, wherever it is, subconsciously, you are reviewing that part of the chart whenever the sun is transiting it. Subconsciously, because you do not have access to it on a day-to-day basis. Because the process of birth gives rise to individuation and a separation, or what seems like a separation from source, and the creation of an individual being, and the birth of the ego. Okay? When you are outside of the realm of the personal planets, the two planets with whom identification is very complicated and intricate, the Moon and Mercury, the two other planets with whom it's really more a matter of passion and action and drive and desire, Venus and Mars, the so-called personal planets. So the personal planets would be Mercury, the Moon, Venus, Mars, and some would say the Sun. But in the way that I look at it, the Sun stands on its own. It is your truth. It is a certain fundamental clarity. It is your soul. It is not always accessible. People will often say that if you're experiencing someone, you have to get to know them really pretty well to know them at a sun sign level. Typically, what you will encounter, you may encounter their Mercury, you will certainly probably encounter their Moon as you hang out with them, but probably what you're encountering is their ascendant or their node, their north node. But a person's sun sign is much more present and much more fundamental at a soul level. That's where the Sun is. The Sun is connected to Source and the truth, and is a bridge and a link between our individuated selves that are trying to negotiate and manage through time-space reality, and are here to try and take care of ourselves and our survival and our needs and our desires, and Source itself. So when the personal planets are stilled, I will say, for example, through meditation, you can access your soul and a certain clarity and a truth. And wherever the Sun is transiting through Cancer right now, and you know where Cancer is in your chart, that part of the chart is going to be spotlit and clear. And you will subconsciously at a soul level, be reviewing that part of the chart and your life while the Sun is here. At a certain point, while the Sun is there, the Moon will be in the same degree, will meet it, and a new Moon will be created, thereby individuating the Sun's subconscious review into something that is more conscious and tangible. Once we are born, and once we develop a greater sense of our sense of self, we become individuated, and our ego self becomes more present. When it comes to the Moon, our emotional life, and Mercury, our mind, as some would say, our lesser mind, in Buddhist terms, our monkey mind, the part of you that is trying to make sense of everything and process data and process information and give you a sense of what is right or wrong, and trying to, your rationality, whether it is rational or not. Thank you, doggy, for having a moon-like emotional reaction to whatever it is that you're reacting to at this time in the video. It's a neighbor's dog, I can't control it. So essentially, when it comes to the Moon and the Mercury, our identification with the Moon and the Mercury, our emotional instincts and our emotional desires, and what is going to fulfill us emotionally. What do I feel like eating right now? What do I feel like watching right now? What will make me happy? Do I reach for that glass of wine? What is going to give me peace of mind, but really peace of emotion? What am I going to need to do in order to be happy and content? We don't always have a space between our soul and this part of our life that we are so hooked into, and that has its hooks into us. By the same token, and in the same way, we don't really have a sense of separation between our soul and our mind. What do I think about this person? Oh, this person looks this way. Or this person is acting this way. Or this person said this to me. Or this is what that email said. Oh, I've really got to get this done. Oh, I'm really anxious about this. Oh, this is really bothering me. Oh, I'm trying to make sense of this. This is being really mysterious. They're being really shady here. Is this person after me, or is this person not after me? Do I like this person, or do I not like this person? Do I like this job? Do I not like this job? Our mind trying to make our sense of individuated egoic attachment to the Moon and Mercury is so strong that we cannot always distinguish ourselves from them. It's an open question as to the sun, whether or not the sun really stands for us and whether or not the moon stands for us. From a Vedic or a Jyotish perspective, and from a new moon perspective, and a full moon perspective, and from a lunar return perspective, for anyone who knows who that is, it could easily be argued that the moon stands for us. And what I will say is, because we track with the moon so strongly, as I've told you in the video I did about lunar cycles and new moons and full moons, and I mentioned the lunar return, all I ever have to do is see where the moon is in my part of the chart and in my solar return, and I know what will predominantly be playing out in my life for this 2.5 days. Unmistakably, I cannot make that up. When the moon is in my financial houses, I will get readings and I will get income. I will get income at other times as well, but that is when it is pronounced. That is when it is clear. When the moon is in the sector of my friends, I will find myself hanging out with a friend. Find myself. I don't even have to do it. When the moon is in the sector of the chart that has to do with career, I'll be focused on it. Unmistakable. But I will still maintain that the self and who I am at a fundamental core level is reflected by the sun. The reason why on an egoic level or on an astrological level, some astrologers and astrology systems look at the moon as who we are, it is because it is the strongest symbol of our individuated egoic selves, the person, in the way that the person is managing their lives. And you cannot get away from your moon or your moon sign, because ultimately, on a very deep reactive level, you are constantly going to be trying to find emotional fulfillment and equilibrium, and the moon will drive you. Right next to the moon, as far as we are concerned, is Mercury. The moon can at least get away from the sun and get away from the sun and have its full moons and its quarter moons. Mercury can never really get that far from the sun. That's because the moon is revolving around us and can circle us, just like the sun is circling us from our perspective. But Mercury and the sun are too close together from where we sit to get too far from each other. 3 times a year, Mercury goes retrograde. Our relationship with our mind is very complex. It also helps drive us, and our identification with the mind is extremely and extraordinarily strong. We don't always, but the Mercury cycle also reflects why it is that our minds are all over the place. When does a planet go retrograde? A planet, our orbits around the sun are not always perfect spheres. They can be elliptical. And as a result of which, it's like 2 buses going around the sun. And sometimes when the buses are turning, the bus that is closer to the sun and therefore has a stronger and is typically faster, when it is at a certain point of the orbit, it's like 2 buses, and it's just at that part of the orbit where it looks like it is moving backwards to us. It's like 2 buses going together, and all of a sudden one is moving faster and the other slower, and it looks to us like this bus is moving backwards, but it's not really moving backwards. It's just all of a sudden a planet that is typically faster and moving around us, we're in that part of the orbit where it's that kind of careening. We're actually moving at our own regular pace, but the planet to us is slowing down. Mercury, because it is so close to the sun, retrogrades 3 times a year and has its own cycles and its own identifications. Our relationship with our minds, our ability to process things rationally, put plans into place, construct our to-do lists, manage our environment, manage data, stay on top of things, get things done, transact, communicate, and make sense of our reality is a 2 steps forward, 1 step backward process, because Mercury is retrograde for 3 times in a year, for 3 weeks. And you would say that's only 9 weeks, but the bottom line is when it is retrograde, those are 9-week cycles. Mercury is moving forward, that's it's moving forward from 1 degree to 15 degrees, and it goes retrograde at 15 degrees, so it's going to go back to 1 degree, and then it's going to go forward again. It transits the same degrees 3 times. It's 3 separate sets of degrees during the year as it moves around. So at least 27 weeks of the year out of 52, almost half a year, Mercury is traveling a degree that it is going to go over again and then again. Am I 100% accurate about that? No, but that's pretty close to the way it seems to us. So the question of whether our minds are moving forward and things are clear or things are murky, and whether the dust needs to settle, or whether we're making sense of things, or whether we're confused, or whether we are anxious, or whether we're on top of things, or whether our plans need to be revised, or that something needs to be revised or relooked at again, or something needs to be revisited, or, oh, I signed this and I thought this is what I would do, but now I think differently, and I don't know what, the mind, our identification with it is extraordinarily strong, but without understanding the lunar and the Mercury archetypes, we are not necessarily going to be able to separate ourselves to really look at where does the sun is at any given point in time and what is really going on at a soul level. Why am I spending so much time on the moon and Mercury? The moon is important to spend time on. I'm spending time on Mercury because my next video, or the next to next video, or soon, I'm going to talk about a Mercury cycle and what that is about and what that is like. And what is important currently to take away from this particular video is the idea that our identification with these two planets, the moon and Mercury, that really define the way we look at our reality and react to it through our emotions and through our rationality, which is a way of taking in stimulus and trying to make sense of it based on the way that we are conditioned up here. At least I think that's why it's happening. It could be happening all over the nervous system. Is really important when we're looking at charts and trying to figure out who someone is and what fulfills them and what drives them, but also where we are at any given time in the process. By the time we get to Mars and Venus, our desires, our actions, what we are doing and what we are desiring and what we are attracting and what we're going after, there's a little bit more, it's with Mars and Venus, there's a little bit more space and distance, and we are moving away. If the sun is about being and the moon and Mercury are about reacting, at their best responding, but rarely. You have to be pretty evolved to be responding and not reacting continually. And frankly, responding and not reacting often requires a negation of the emotional reaction or the mental reaction. And the idea that mental reaction is somehow superior to emotional reaction, at least to me from an astrological perspective, isn't really true. A response happens at a soul level with distance, and you are silencing not only your mind but also your emotions. So not only is the idea of projecting rationality and intuition and darkness onto the feminine planets or onto the moon and extolling the rational mind, it's a booby trap. The rational mind, the mind is conditioned. The greatest contribution, I think, of Buddhist thought, of the Buddha, is to say the mind is conditioned as much as your emotions are conditioned, and they're closer together and more intertwined than you think. By the time you get to the Venus and Mars, we're in the realm of doing. Being, reacting, doing. These are the personal planets. Venus being the feminine receptive archetype, not completely understood, typically granting us blessings, typically seeking harmony. Mars being the male archetype and going after what it is that he wants. Two important aspects of being individuated and being human. Going after what you want, not taking no for an answer, is more acceptable and more extolled and praised than being receptive. But it's really interesting how not taking no for an answer, which is routinely praised in men and women. Oh, you know what? This person is so great. They're so strong. They're so ambitious. They never take no for an answer. Well, the flip side of it is something like the Me Too movement. You got to know when to take no for an answer. And it is whatever your biological gender identification orientation, when you encounter someone who does not know how to take no for an answer, who's coming at you with Mars's drive and occasional rapaciousness. So if you want someone and if you want something, really, and it doesn't matter what their circumstance, that is, whether you are male or female, Mars is active. Whereas with Venus, it is a very different intelligence. It is a very different kind of blessing. It is a very different way of seeking and finding a solution. Resolution, not retribution. So with the sun being, with the moon and Mercury reacting, with Mars and Venus doing and embodying at this point in time real gender archetype separation, by the time we come to Jupiter and Saturn, we are now starting to move into a different realm. And from an ancient perspective, this is where the planets stopped. There was no Chiron, there was no Uranus, there was no Neptune, there was no Pluto. And I mean ancient Greek, ancient Babylonian, and those planets, we just did not know of their existence. We could not see them. With Jupiter and Saturn, there's a greater interplay between divine intervention, divine opportunities, divine getting beaten up, divine karmic retribution, divine pressure to make new beginnings, divine pressure to get our act together, and we have a space to respond to them. So it is an interplay between intervention and our own response and action. As we get further out, our own action and ability to react, respond, act minimizes as the planets get further and further. And the further away a planet is, the more it is a planet that does to us, as opposed to us doing or us having agency. With Chiron and Uranus, we still have an opportunity to incorporate and actively participate in what is being brought to us. But at that point in time, the forces are more mysterious, more healing, more liberating, more wounding, more karmic. And by the time we get to Neptune and Pluto, there's nothing you can do. Neptune and Pluto bring and deliver things, and you have no choice other than to simply, at times, respond, but really just accept. Your response is your surrender. Your response is your acceptance. Whether you like it or not, Neptune and Pluto will prevail. Uranus and Chiron will as well, but there's a greater interplay. With Jupiter and Saturn, the interplay and what is being brought to you is still very earthly. It's still about making you successful on this earthly realm. It is still playing with your individuated ego self. By the time we get to Chiron, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, there are karmic, divine design forces at work that the sun part of you can be aware of, but the moon and Mercury part struggle with, because we don't like to deal with Pluto, the planet of death and transformation. We don't really like to deal with Neptune when it is acting on us and asking us to dissolve and give up things, because when we leave this planet, we're not going to be taking them with us. These are both planets that test our attachment to reality. Okay? All of this, nearly half our video, I hope you found it fascinating. I'm going to wrap up now so I can be the 30-minute mark. The longest video I've done so far, actually, is to set up what I'm going to talk about with the Mercury cycle. Because what I want to introduce is the sense of where the planets are at, and introduce to you, I've already done a video on the lunar cycles, so this will only give you greater clarity with regard to new moons and full moons and how it represents us and where things are playing out on our individuated, this is me, this is Abhi, this is my world, this is my reality, this is what I'm trying to do, this is what I'm doing, this is what is being done to me, self. There's an emotional reactive part of it, and there's a mental reactive part of it. And the next video, whenever I get around to the Mercury video and talking about the Mercury cycle, is going to talk to you about our relationship with our minds. When we talk about our mental health, we're really talking about our mental and emotional health. And this is why up to a point now, a medical practitioner may well find themselves recommending Vipassana or meditation or a greater separation between reactiveness and our sense of ourselves as one possible way to minimize being in the throes of imbalance. Whether that imbalance is genetic, whether that imbalance is accumulated over time. But between the moon and Mercury, our sense of balance and imbalance is very much related to whether we are in a comfort zone or not. And the Mercury cycle and Mercury retrogrades, I really want you to start to understand from within this sphere and outlook of sometimes I feel like I'm on top of things and things are going smoothly and the emails and the communication, everything, I'm in sync with the world around me. And for about half of the year, none of it makes sense and I'm struggling, or I'm having to go back on things, or I'm going to have, or things are not clear, or my mind feels hampered or foggy. And this is why, archetypally. I don't know why it works this way. As I've said before, I'm kind of maintain a healthy skepticism as far as astrology is concerned, but I remain in a place of observation. Okay, I hope you found this interesting and fascinating. And I will be back in touch. Please feel free to like this video, share this video if you found it useful, subscribe to my YouTube channel. You'll have to, if you're getting this on Facebook or Twitter, you'll have to go into YouTube to subscribe to my channel. Click the bell icon so you can be notified whenever I do a new video if you find this interesting. And I will be back in touch to do the next few videos. I'm going to review the one I did on the solar eclipse, and I'm going to add links to the solar eclipse and Cancer video at the end of this once I'm done processing it. So if you don't see it, just come back. Today is the 30th of June, so later on the 30th of June 2019, those links will be up. And I'm also going to put a link to the video I did on lunar cycles and another one to birth charts. I think that's what I'm going to do. So you have some place to go that builds on some of the stuff we've talked about. I'm going to take a look at the solar eclipse video, see if I feel like it's sufficient to repost. I'm not going to repost it on YouTube, but on Facebook and on Twitter after the 2nd. And if I feel like there's more to add, then I'll continue to add it. Okay, done with this. Looking forward to talking about the Mercury cycle with you in greater detail. Okay, thanks, bye.